Hello, everybody. I'm going to be reading the first chapter of a book called Dishwasher by Pete Jordan. It's a book I enjoy. Read it a while ago. Dishwasher: One Man's Quest to Wash Dishes in All 50 States by Pete Jordan. That's him on Dave Letterman being interviewed. Part one is initiation. 1 o'clock. A bead of sweat rolled from my forehead, down my nose, and into the greasy orange sink water. I wiped my face with my apron, lifted my baseball cap to cool my head, and sighed. As I picked at the food dregs that had coagulated from the sink water onto my arm hairs, I surveyed my domain, the dish pit. It was a mess. The counters were covered with the remains of what not long before had been meals, but the dish machine stood empty. No dirty dishes were in sight. No one yelled, "More plates or silver, we need silverware." For the first time in hours, a calm settled over my dish room. Having successfully beaten back the bulk of the dinner rush, I was caught up and it felt good. Time for another go around. On my way to the waitress station, I grabbed an empty bus tub and twirled it on my middle finger, a trick I had perfected while working at a bagel shop in New Mexico. I lowered the spinning tub from my finger to my cap, a new trick I'd yet to perfect. The tub sputtered from my head and plummeted into the full bus tub that awaited me. A couple plates smashed to the floor. The crash rang throughout the restaurant and was followed by a shocked hush from employees and customers alike. I too observed the moment of silence for the departed plates. But I wasn't sad to see them go. If dishes had to break, and they did have to, then it was best to break the dirty ones, rather than the plates I'd already worked to clean. In some Illinois cemetery, Josephine Cochran was spinning in her grave. She was the 1880s socialite who'd grown fed up by her servants, breaking her precious china as they washed it by hand. Cochran presumed that by reducing the handling, there would be far less breakage. So she invented the motorized dishwashing machine. Her contraption became an instant hit with large restaurants and hotels in Chicago. Even the machine I was using at this place, a Hobart, was a direct descendant of Cochran's. But now, more than a century since the introduction of her innovation, sorry, I'm having a problem. My lights are flickering on and off. Okay, let me try again. In some Illinois cemetery, Josephine Cochran was spinning in her grave. She was the 1880s socialite who'd grown fed up by her servants, breaking her precious china as they washed it by hand. Cochran presumed that by reducing the handling, there'd be far less breakage. So she invented the motorized dishwashing machine. Her contraption became an instant hit with large restaurants and hotels in Chicago. Even the machine I was using at this place, a Hobart, was a direct descendant of Cochran's. But now, more than a century since the introduction of her innovation, human dishwashers, particularly this one, were just as cavalier about dish breakage as they had been back in Cochran's day. As I looked down at the wreckage at my feet, the boss guy charged around the corner, wide-eyed, with his hand clutched to his chest as if he'd been shot. "Plates fell," I said. "Again?" he sighed. "Try to be more careful, Dave." 6 weeks earlier, when a fellow dish dog had tipped me off about this gig, an Austrian-themed inn at a ski area in Vermont's Green Mountains that came complete with room and board, I was immediately intrigued. I had pictured myself isolated in the mountains and hibernating through the winter at this job while getting caught up with my reading, saving up some money and crossing yet another American state off my list. When I called about the job from Wisconsin, the boss guy assumed that if I wanted to come all that way to dish in a ski area, then I must have been a ski nut. No, I told him. Actually, I don't ski. That made him suspicious. He then asked, "Well, do you have long hair?" "Not anymore," I said. "Okay," he said. "If you can get here by next week, the job's yours." I rode the bus most of the way and hitchhiked the rest, and when I arrived, the boss was no longer suspicious. I was willing to dish, and that was enough for him. In fact, he gave so little thought to me by that second day, he started calling me by the wrong name. "And Dave, clean it up," he said, looking at the broken plates on the floor. I'd never bothered to correct him. "All right," I said. When he turned and walked back to the dining room, I kicked the debris under the counter and headed back to the dish pit with the full bus tub. While unloading the dirty dishes, I mined for treasure in the tub buffet. The first find was fool's gold, a half-eaten schnitzel. I couldn't blame the diner who'd left the second half uneaten. It was the place's specialty, but it wasn't very special. I snobbishly passed on it as well and continued excavating. I unearthed more dishes and then struck pay dirt. Some garlic bread and remnants of creme brulee. I smeared the creme brulee on the garlic bread and scarfed it down. "Scrumptious," said my taste buds. "Queasy," countered my stomach. The gut had a point. Bus tub buffet, more like bus tub roulette. You win some, you lose some. So far, I was losing. As I was guzzling water from the tap, the call went up in the adjacent kitchen. "Wine o'clock! Wine o'clock!" I looked at the clock. Indeed, it was already wine o'clock. Dick, one of the cooks, entered the dish pit with a grin on his face and a jar in each hand. He handed me a jar and held up the other in a toast. "Wine o'clock," he said. "Wine o'clock," I repeated. We clinked jars and then downed their cooking sherry contents. Wine o'clock was 8 o'clock, an hour before closing time, and an occasion observed by the cooks with rounds of sherry. Closing time, 9 o'clock, was celebrated in a similar fashion, except with shouts of 5 o'clock, and the consumption of 5 o'clock brand vodka. A couple of weeks earlier, the inevitable cook waitress tension had come to a head over the question of how the waitresses should place their orders. The waitresses wanted to just give the ticket, the food order, to the salad cook, who in turn would relay it to the line cooks and then to the dessert cook. I mean, the cooks argued it'd be better if the waitress wrote their tickets in triplicate and distributed copies to each of the 3 cooking stations. The waitresses were less than thrilled. From the dish pit doorway, while consuming bus tub buffet, strudel, and wine o'clock sherry, I watched the 2 groups bicker. The cooks had their clique, and the waitresses theirs, but as the dishman, I kept to myself and labored alone, the way I liked it. What happened? Okay, where was I? Okay, so as the dishman, I kept to myself. What the hell's that? Okay, as the dishman, I kept to myself and labored alone the way I liked it. But then a cook suddenly shouted, "Look at the dishwasher then." Let's ask the dishwasher then. Looks from all 20 or so eyes darted my way. I quickly averted them all. I looked down at my hands, down at the strudel, down at the cooking sherry. Wine o'clock! I'd been accepting the wine o'clock sherry from the cooks. The waitresses never gave me any sherry. I cleared my throat and then announced, "Triplicates sound better." The scales tipped. From then on, the order placing was done the cook's way. But that'd been a couple weeks earlier. Now wine o'clock had struck once again. I emptied my jar and dove back into the sinks. As my stomach settled, I sweated out several more rounds of clean dishes. Then someone behind me said, "Hun?" In the doorway stood the waitress, who'd never uttered a word to me. Now I was Hun. She probably wanted me to do some part of her job, like empty the waitress station trash can. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah? Is it true what Linda just told me? She said that you go all over washing dishes." Of course it was true. It was my life's mission, after all. but that didn't mean I wanted my cover to be blown. I hesitated again. I now regretted having cracked under the intense questioning from the nosy Linda. My anonymity had been compromised. Yeah, I finally stammered as I nervously picked at my arm hair boogers. I guess it's true. Wow, she said. So you like go all over? She was hooked. I'd seen it so many times before. A waitress who barely notices a quiet, dopey dish man suddenly gets interested once she finds out that he's a traveling, quiet, dopey dish man. Yeah, sure, I answered. That's so cool, she said, entering the dish pit. I wish I could do that. I shrugged and asked, why don't you? I don't know, she said. Seems hard. Hard, I asked. No, staying in one place is hard. You think? For the first time, I realized how cute she was. Tall, bobbed, dark hair, glasses, requisite black skirt, and white blouse. If only she'd flirted with me like this weeks earlier. I would have sided with the waitress in the order placing debate. That would have scored me some points. Who knows, maybe she'd have started dropping by my basement room behind and after work. If so, I wondered, could I stay indefinitely at this job? Could I hack coming to it every day? Could I handle living in the mountains of Vermont for good? Or would she lose interest in her quiet, dopey dishman shed the mystique of being a traveler? She had other she had other ideas in mind. Maybe I can tag along with you, she said. Could she be serious? Yeah, sure, tag along, I said. You can wait the tables and I'll wash the dishes. Ha, that'd be a blast, she said, squeezing my arm. Looking down at her delicate hand on my grungy arm hair, I took a deep breath and then asked, so what are you doing after work? She let go of my arm. After work, my boyfriend's picking me up. Boyfriend, huh? What have I been thinking? Of course she had a boyfriend. Of course I couldn't stay at this job or in these mountains forever. Hey, you should come out with us, she said. He'd really get a kick out of meeting the guy who washes dishes all over. Nah, I said, pulling some plates from the bus tub. No thanks. I never could anticipate what it would be, the one thing that'd make me crack. But once the notion of quitting entered my head, there was no use fighting it. The whim could strike at any time. On an ordinary morning, waking up to see it snowing outside, just like it had in Pittsburgh. Or the idea could hit mid-shift when someone tried to boss me around like what happened in Reno. The feeling could even overcome me when I learned a friend was leaving town that I could catch a ride with her as it had in Seattle. Whatever the case, once the notion hit, I was powerless. And now, just hearing mention of this flirty waitress's boyfriend, I knew it was time to go. 6 weeks earlier, upon my arrival, I sincerely thought I'd last the whole winter. Then again, I sincerely believed all my grandiose plans would pan out despite a lengthy track record that proved otherwise. My chat with the waitress was interrupted by Dick. 5 o'clock, he said, handing me a jar of vodka. 5 o'clock, I repeated. Vermont was the 23rd state I'd conquered. By the, by the time I was due at work the following day, I was already seeking out my next dish job in another state.